Namazi Oke Okachuku.
This is Straight Talk Radio, the world as we see.
Coming to you from WGHC 98.3 FM. Your voice, your music, your station.
Listen to us this and every Saturday at 4 to 5 p.m. U.S. Central, and this and every Tuesday at 9 to 10 p.m. U.S. Central.
Ndi Igbo.
Hey, Igbo kwenu. Hey, Kwano. Hey, Sotano. Hey, Matano. Hey, Kwesoni. Hey.
Good evening. This is Maazi Ejike Obasi coming to you from Straight Talk Radio, WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. My co-hosts, as always, will be Maazi Oke Okachuku
Ndi Igbo.
And Maazi Keke Odeluga, who will be joining us shortly. Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk Radio. Today we are going to be talking about something that would fit into February being Black History Month here in the United States. And we thought it would be a good time to begin to discuss the state of affairs of Ndi Igbo as part of the black world here in the United States. And so over the course of the next few programs, we shall be talking about Igbos in America, or Ndi Igbo in America. Here we will talk about various aspects, both migratory patterns, impact, and what it means for those of us that are living in the diaspora, the American diaspora today. I have been joined by a co-host, Maazi Keke Odeluga.
Ndi Igbo.
So, if I may begin, I think if you talk about Igbos in America, we would have to start by, we have to start at the very beginning, which means who were the first Ndi Igbo in America? How did they arrive? And what influence have they had, not just in the United States, but also in the Americas, which to us would include the islands that border the United States, where we are well aware slave colonies used to exist. So, if I may begin, Maazi Odeluga, do you want to speak a little bit to this first migration?
They would. I mean, it's quite an interesting discovery, because you ask yourself, why do we have Black History Month? Because Black History Month came to be because the Africans in the America realized that their story is not being told.
Okay.
And that is something that I think is very important, that for us as Ndi Igbo, and indeed every ethnic group, especially for the Africans, to own their story.
Okay.
Because for the Europeans, their thought pattern is that you guys didn't have any history until the European contact. Yep. So the African history is the story of European contact. When I saw you is really when you began to exist.
Okay.
Which is not true, because Africa has been at the cradle of civilization. We know that just based on genetics that life began in Africa. And so it made sense that the Americas cannot be organized, or a new country or nation come up in the Americas without African participation. Sadly, we came maybe not in one of the most glorious ways,
Yes.
but anyhow, I think it's part of providence that we will come. Now, the first Africans that arrived in what was known as the Americas must have arrived with the Spanish America in the southeastern parts of America, which is around Florida, because the Spanish were the first people to establish a colony around Florida, which it was not very successful. Now, the one that is most often talked about is Jamestown,
Yes.
which is the first British or European establishment. Yes. So in 1619, August 1619, it was documented the arrival of 20 odd Negroes. That was the way history documented it. And so that was the arrival of the first Africans. Now we know who those Africans are. Majority, all of them actually came out of Angola. And so they were the first Africans that were present in Jamestown. So when America looks at Africans and kind of like make us feel that we are nobodies, or we never really was supposed to be part of this whole experience called America, or we never participated, we were there at the ground level. So at Jamestown, you can place the Africans. And quite a good number of us came throughout the whole period. And so if you go to the Jamestown exhibit now, you see more room and space in that whole story, and the history has been given to the Africans. Now, regarding the Igbo, who were the first ones and where we arrived, nobody can really say specifically, but I can tell you that historical documents does suggest that from the 1701 up until the late 18th century, the Igbos arrived in great numbers, especially through the Chesapeake Bay, which is Virginia. So, and of course, that coincided with when the British entered into slave trade, and the Calabar and Bonny ports became very important ports of exit, which means the Bight of Biafra became quite important in the slave trade. That was when the Igbo started leaving Africa in great numbers. And so that is important, because for us as Ndi Igbo to ask ourselves, how did this happen? Because the issue of slave trade is never really discussed among our people in ways. No meaningful conversation has really been had, because so many families, communities were devastated by that trade.
Okay, so Mazi, perhaps would you want to comment on something that a door that Mazi Odeluga is trying to open right now, being that while we cannot speak for the whole of Africa, I am quite sure that the Igbo experience is also very likely the experience of much of the African countries or tribes from which slaves ended up in the Americas. Why is it that within the African communities themselves, we do not talk about these things?
Just like when we discussed the Nigerian Biafran War, a lot of things happened that are not glorious, as Mazi Odeluga put it.
Okay.
So there are a lot of hurt on some families that actually lost people that were moved to the Americas against their will, And there are also some hurt on the side of the people who found themselves on the other side, no matter what the circumstance that brought them there was, because there was a separation.
Yes.
So I think it's, but like everything else, right? We talked about the war and how after the war we didn't heal very well because it wasn't talked about. If we don't start discussing that history, then that hurt is going to keep expanding. And actually the time doesn't always heal all wounds like we hear. Time actually sometimes make it harder
Faster.
to heal the wound. So the more we could talk about this and actually look through history, because none of us living here made some of those decisions. We're just living whatever happened with the decisions that were made. So if we could start talking about it now, then we could understand each other better, and we could start bridging whatever the divide is between the people that made it here before the rest of us that actually got here later, or even the people that are back still in Africa who may be feeling the devastation that happened with the people they lost.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's quite an important point that brought up, because there is no community in Igbo land that was not impacted by slavery. It's a very shameful thing.
I know the story of my family, how we ended up where we ended up in the Navy. It was something attached to slavery. My great-grandfather, fourth generation from me, lost a brother to a slave trade.
Yes.
And his parents were gone, and because of fear that the same fate may happen to him, he decided to move, maybe not too far, but he decided to move from where was his homeland, the hometown, to
where he felt safe.
Where he felt safe.
Yes.
So I agree with what you're saying, and I know people have even much more bigger stories than mine that are much more dramatic.
And that is interesting, because in this day and age, the use of technology has now allowed us to actually even place the diasporic Africans. So Africans have been in the Americas for more than 400 years. So we're not just Johnny just come. So even as people are talking about deportation of Africans, or go back to your country, or we don't want you. No, I tell them, look,
there will be no America without Africa.
Thank you.
Yes.
Because that is truth.
Yes.
We were the ones that actually helped clear the frontiers and built up this country out of our own free labor.
Yes.
And that free labor is part of what built up the capitalistic system that you see today. A whole lot of the American economic infrastructure were built on plantation economy.
Yes.
And it was on the backs of our ancestors, our men and our women. But be that as it may, I think we need to really talk about what happened at home.
Yes.
Because, for example, you told a very personal story of your great-grandfather relocating because at a certain geographic space where he used to be part of the community, his brother was sold into slavery.
Yep.
And so he felt unsafe, and he moved to another place where he can find security. I know as part of my family's history that they said my grandfather, by the turn of the century, which was even at the end of the slave trade, had to go to Arochukwu to buy back one of his nieces that was kidnapped. And that's an interesting thing, because majority of the Igbo that left were left through kidnapping. There were very few maybe who were taken as prisoners of war, unlike within the Yoruba Empire or your empire, where there was a lot of conflict, and during the Yoruba wars, that a lot of people were sold into slavery because of that. So a lot of our people left through kidnapping. So the concept of dimpa.
Yes.
Dimpa
is kidnapping.
Dimpa is kidnapping. Dimpa is the chief kidnapper.
Professional kidnapper. Just
yes.
like DG is professional farmer that farms here.
Or somebody
or
who
Dinta who is professional hunter.
Yes. Somebody who has excelled in hunting or in farming, in yam cultivation. So the Dimpa is the guy, and that's why when people see somebody who's huge, well-built man, they say this guy,
muscular,
he's all Dimpa.
Right. So we've normalized the word now so that it means somebody who's healthy and pumped up and built
and
up.
strong.
Yes.
And
but it wasn't always a good word.
Yes.
But if we can take a step back, because it is funny that you alluded to the fact that slavery was not this homogeneous activity.
Yes.
Right.
In the Americas, in the New World, it was simple. These were slaves. You put them on the block, you sell them.
Yes.
And people buy them.
Yep.
But from where they came, the stories are as diverse as there are people.
Yes.
Some people were people who lived in kingdoms. A lot of slaves came through conquest.
Yes.
And came through war. In fact, it is funny because if you go through Nigerian history, there is an emir in the middle, the emir of Kontangora is particularly known as being so greedy that he virtually sold anybody he could see and sell.
Yes.
And eventually the British deposed him to avoid depopulating his area.
Yes.
But if you bring it back to Ndi Igbo
Yes.
and Ali Igbo, we never really had a situation where you had people go to war, capture big groups of people and sell.
Yes.
It was more often...
So let me try
Sure.
this. So
Sure.
in Igbo land, when there was war, and there were wars,
Yes,
from what I read and understand,
yes,
people who are defeated
Yes.
go into servitude sometimes.
yes.
And the servitude that we know, it's not the slavery that
Absolutely
happened here.
not.
So
Yes.
if you ask me, I'm going to try to make excuses for those people who actually took people that they defeated in war and gave them to the Europeans.
Yes,
They probably did not understand that the servitude they were selling these people to was not the same as what they were used to. So we knew what servitude was, somebody that was taken from another land that was defeated, but they did not go through the cruel punishment and all the other things that
yes.
visited the people that came over here.
I would agree and I would disagree.
Okay.
I agree with you strongly
Okay.
in terms of the fact that because I don't know if it's to whitewash history, all of these have been lumped under that word slavery.
Right.
In the pure sense, in the sense of which it was practiced in America and the Americas, Ndi Igbo did not have slaves.
I was careful to say servitude.
Yes, yes. So
I was
that's why
careful
I
to-
agree with you.
Yes, yes,
We did not have slaves in that sense.
yes.
A man was still a man
Yes.
and had worth. And a man could earn over time his freedom.
Freedom, right?
And if I am not mistaken, that a man lived in servitude did not automatically put his children in servitude.
No.
Yes.
no,
It
no.
was a bond between you and whoever you had this deal with. Your children were not bound to it.
In fact, by the second generation,
Yes.
they are assimilated into the clan.
Into the clan. So that's the point I'm trying to make. That so it is. I think it is very wrong to begin to lump all of these into that word slavery, because if you look at the connotation of slavery as it stands in the black or the African experience in the Americas, it is a very different thing.
Yeah,
Very
so for
right.
the Americans, it
Yes.
was chattel slavery, where the slave was a property,
Yes.
Right.
not a human being,
Yes.
and was treated as that, property. Now, within the Igbo context, he was a human being who has the right to marry, has the right to live his life, develop his own household, and actually became part of the family that assimilated them,
Yes.
that actually acquired, that he served. So at some point, he becomes a willing partner and will own land, own property, with
And
time,
marry.
and marry with
Become
time
a
and have
member of the
children.
community.
Now, but I want us to go back.
Well, if I may
Yes.
just finish because the part I disagree with
Yes.
is I don't think we want to give a blanket pass to Ndi Igbo on the grounds that because this is the way we saw slavery. That's why maybe we did not feel because it is, if you go through history, and a lot of people through historical documents and even through fiction, you begin to realize very quickly that at the root of Igbo slavery was greed.
Yes.
It was greed.
Yes.
Pure and simple. The motivation to do this was wealth.
Yep.
And wealth in terms of either acquisition of guns, acquisition of trinkets, or whatever it is you collected from the European, well, at the beginning, the Portuguese.
Yes.
So a lot of them, if you look at the Arochukwu axis,
Yes.
to the ocean, and those that went through parts of now Cross River State or Akwa Ibom, Calabar, yes,
Biafra.
yes, they were in contact with the whites.
Yes.
You cannot convince me that the white men that picked them up from the shores and the prisons or the holding places treated them very nicely and put them on the ship and then changed. So I do not at all accept the fact that they did not know what they were doing.
Yes.
But I will just say that at the end of the day, greed is a universal emotion, and we are not immune to it.
Yes. So the question is, how did they become slaves?
But so he said something that I think I need help with.
Sure.
So the interaction with the Europeans didn't start with slavery. We were trading with Europeans way before, hundreds of years before slavery.
Absolutely.
The Portuguese were there, the French were there, the
Dutch,
the
Dutch were,
Spanish,
and we were going all the way towards the north and back. But slavery started after the British got in.
No,
no.
Before the transatlantic slave trade,
Yes.
everybody should not forget
Yes.
that there was the trans-Sahara trade.
Yes.
A lot of the empires that were built in West Africa, for example, the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire,
Were through
The Kanem Bornu Empire.
they all traded in slaves. It's either gold, slaves, or salt. Those were the major commodities that built up these empires. Now, the trans-Saharan trade was going on until the Ottoman occupied the Ottoman Empire occupied the Asia Minor, and so blocked the trade between the Europe West and the East. So then, of course, the Portuguese began to navigate the ocean to find now the so-called sea route to India.
Yes.
Now, that was how they began
got lost.
to make contact with
No
our people.
GPS, right.
But for many people, they think part of what triggered this European interest in the sub-Saharan Africa or West African region was the pilgrimage that Mansa Musa had
Yes.
to Mecca. Because for the number of years that he was on his way to Mecca, the value of gold fell in Europe because of the amount of gold that he carried. And so then this whole European greed and appetite, like, oh man, it looks like there's an El Dorado somewhere beyond this whole the Sahara,
the hidden city,
the hidden cities,
there
or the forests. And so they started coming. So when the Portuguese started coming, they were hogging the coast mainly, and like you said, it was trade.
Yes.
Then eventually they established plantation economies in some of the coastal islands like San Tome, Equatorial
West
Guinea,
Indies.
and Cape Verde.
Yes.
This was
Verde,
even
yes.
before the West Indies.
Yes.
So it was after the plantation economy had been perfected around the coast of West Africa that they now could see how they could develop those kind of economies.
But I bet you they were using
West
Africans to help them do this before without taking them into slavery.
Well, and that is the point.
Some of them were indentured servants.
They were indentured servants. In fact, if you look at the history of places like Sao Tome,
Yes.
yes, they did have indentured servants. But even beyond that, let us remember that old kingdoms, do you know that the princes in the old Benin Empire
buried way here.
were sent to, they were sent to Portugal.
Yes. From and Warri, yes.
Yes,
Some
they
of
went
them
to Portugal as princes.
Right.
They
Went
were
to school.
afforded
Yes.
all the respect you would afford royalty.
Yes.
So the initial contact between Europeans and Africans was not what it was made out to be. The story that Africans are savages,
Right.
and that was, I think, that was part of the British narrative.
That was made up to justify.
Yes, to justify slavery.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's right.
So it is where you give a dog a bad name.
Yes.
Yes.
So part
Then
of the
you can-
argument
yes.
was that slavery is actually better than what the kind of environment that these Africans were taken
That's
out
not
of.
what they meant
Which
when they
was the
got there.
narrative.
Right.
Which was the narrative. Because if you now go back and start looking at, and I think we may talk about this later on, but if you go back and start looking at what is already written, this is not hearsay. This is documentation by the Western world.
Yes.
The first visitors to Benin, for example, that was the first time they saw street lights.
Yep.
There were street lights. Benin was a planned city. It was a walled city. The roads were planned. They were straight. And they used palm oil to light up the streets.
Yes.
Uli.
Okay? So therein lies the origin of street lights, which you will never hear. You look at, and eventually we will talk about the influence of Ndi Igbo, especially in Virginia,
Yes.
Yes.
in current American thinking, because it goes back. You ask a question, Amamihi Igbo, that
Yes.
inherent Igbo, what is our collective intelligence,
And
our
worldview.
ancient, yes, the way we approach life.
Ako.
You see a lot of it in the Declaration of Independence,
Yes.
which begins to beg the question, how do a group of
Feudalist-
people,
feudalist
there you
system.
go, people who are kings, who had serfs, we know how feudal England used to be.
Yes.
We know how England used to be in the days of Cromwell, in the days of the old kings. How did English
How did the
people
idea change?
just come to America and suddenly recognize all men are created equal? Because if you really think about it, Amamihi Igbo.
No, it's quintessential Igbo thought. The fact that na mmadụ bụ mmụọ dị ndụ.
Yes.
Ano onye kwe chi ekwe. Onye
Mmadụ
na chi
akaghị ibe.
onye na chie, onye na
Yes.
chie.
Yes.
And Ohaka,
Yes.
you know, the concept,
It's a community
the
always.
concept that the community, and of course the individual
It's a
is reign,
freedom.
it has freedom,
Yes.
and yes, you know, which is a kind of thinking, and you're right. So we will have opportunity to talk about the Igbo influence or the African influence in contemporary American.
Absolutely.
To the, you know, our contribution to the contemporary American culture, because oftentimes part of the narrative is that we've looked down on ourselves so much so without realizing that actually some of the things we thought were common were not common. There are things that we bring to the global community, that we bring to the table, that are uniquely are gifted, and we should not pull back from it. But I want us to go back to an important aspect of all this, because oftentimes when we see African Americans, Caribbean Americans, or South African people from of African
South
descent
Africa, yeah,
from
yeah.
South America,
Or what we say, black Hispanics.
that's right. we feel disconnected, and or we don't think that these are our people, and we use all kinds of derogatory words, or we kind of like complain and try to make it look like these people are useless or whatever, or you know, derogatory.
They're not working as hard.
Or
as
they're
you.
not working as hard as we. But I want us to step back first to realize one thing,
Yes.
that just like what happened to Joseph and his brothers,
There you go.
That's what most of what happened in Igbo.
That's exactly the story.
The story of either envy, greed,
Yes.
jealousy,
Yes.
evil eye, whatever you call it, brothers sold brothers.
Yes.
And interestingly, a lot of Igbo communities, Igbo families connived and sold their wives when their brothers died so that they will inherit their land.
Yes.
So, for example, if you look at the statistics of Igbos brought to Virginia, you will see that the numbers of men and women are equal, unlike any other ethnic group. Now, the significance of that is that a lot of the present-day African Americans have at least one, a good chunk of them have one Igbo ancestor, because a lot of our mothers, their mothers were our women. Now, but I want us to go back to the idea of who made these Africans that came to America slaves. We did. Because if we did not put them on the block, they would not have been bought.
That's right.
If they were captured by the Europeans, they would have been prisoners of war, and they would be looked at as those who were prisoners of war. But it's important that we recognize that we were the ones that actually dehumanized them. And it is important for us to recognize that, you know, the rejection the African faces globally in the Americas can only be healed by us ourselves accepting our brethren as our own.
So the next time somebody says reparation, they should be paying it from there over here first.
Which, because we received the price.
Yes.
Well, you see, not that I disagree with that line of thought, but I also want you to look at something else, because unfortunately, you know, sometimes you wish that life could be black and white, straight, so you can make clear divisions. But life is messy.
Yes.
It is not that way. So let me give you an example. A man dies. His wife has 2 young sons. The older son is older than the younger son of his younger brother.
Yes.
And the younger brother says, now that the man has died, as my older brother, his son inherits.
Yeah, that's right.
But if I get rid of this woman and the first son, I'm free and clear. So he arranges, and they get taken and sold, leaving the younger brother, who is not a threat because his own children are older than the younger brother.
Yes.
He leaves the younger brother to stay with him, because we know that in that time, male children were valued primarily because of their ability to work the field. Ikubo.
Yes.
So the more male hands you had, the better your yam harvest might be.
Yes.
Right.
So this woman and her son get sold and end up in America, go through a terrible life, have children, and several descendants later, they come up and say, wow, what a terrible thing you did to us. And we all agree.
Yes.
But have you taken a step back to ask, the younger son that stayed, what was his life like? His father has died.
Yes.
His
mother
mother
is
and his
gone.
older brother are gone. He has no protection.
Yes.
He is the one that becomes the doorpost
Yes.
to this family. And basically, they have illegitimized him to the extent it is possible, because Ndi Igbo, in the true sense, we do not have illegitimacy.
That's
You
right.
either belong to your father or you belong to your husband,
to the man of the house.
to the male in the house.
Yes.
So, but have you thought about what his life would be? And then he grows up through much turmoil, has children, his children have children, and then his mother and older brother that were not there to protect him growing up come back to say to him, you are the result, you are the cause of our problems.
Right. So there are victims on both sides.
Absolutely. So it is a very messy thing. Yeah. But the bottom line of it is, which I absolutely agree with, it is time for us to say, hapu ihe tara n'abalị ya wụrụ anwụnta. Let us find a rapprochement. Marada, we are all ainile womunne.
I think it was Congressman Elijah Cummings, when I was listening to him at one of the conferences in Baltimore. He said that whether you came on a slave ship, or you came on the Mayberry, or you came on a liner, that it doesn't matter, because right now we're all in the same boat.
We're all in the same boat. Absolutely.
Yeah, but being in the same boat also then raises the issue at some point.
Yes.
There are privileged positions in those boats based on how you arrived and when you arrived. No, but you see, for the Igbo, that's true.
That's right.
But for a group of Americans, they have been told over and over that you a mistake. It was, if there was an original sin, it was the fact that we brought Africans here. Now, I believe that Providence brought us here.
You started with Joseph.
Yes, and so just like in the story of Joseph,
yes,
his father Jacob,
yes,
was mourning. His brothers lived a lie.
Yes.
And he was in Egypt.
Yes.
Went through very, very difficult and very hard time.
Yes.
The interesting thing is that the way the story ended was then his brothers came up. And when they saw him, they couldn't recognize him. Just the same way many of us do not recognize the African Americans when we came as part of us.
Thank God for DNA tests.
No, we didn't know. So none of us could say, oh, but they saw you and they say, hey, bro, how you doing? Then they say, this one that is calling me bro, Ndi Igbo, or my boss here. You know, he doesn't look like me, doesn't talk like me, doesn't act like me.
No, don't say about not looking.
I've
seen people on the street that I'm thinking, did I not just leave you?
I know.
Did I not just see you before I got on the plane and you're here already?
Yes. Yeah. So no, that's true. You could, in fact, some of them, I can look at an African American and say, this one looks
I could place him exactly what family he came from.
Yes. Yeah. So, but the truth though is that it is time for that reconciliation to happen.
Yes.
For the African family to heal. Now, I know for the African American, they're looking towards the European Americans to say, oh, I'm sorry, you know. You see, Joseph did not look to Egypt for reconciliation and affirmation.
Yes.
He looked towards his brothers.
Yes.
And when he saw his brothers, he confronted them with their
iniquity
sin and said, you
meant this for
meant
evil.
it for evil. But but
God meant it for
and
good.
so he was able to look at it from the other side, that look, if I wasn't here, if I wasn't placed here, then you guys would have really had a problem. But I saw my value to Egypt. Yes. And so the African has been a blessing to America.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
If not for anything, look at the last Super Bowl. I mean, look at the people who played the Super Bowl and everybody was rejoicing, and all the people that made the money. If the Africans were not in that game, the color will not be there.
Well, yeah. We shall at a later time talk about
the game,
the contributions, because it is not sports. I believe is one of the minor contributions of African Americans to the American project.
Yes.
But going back, you know, going back to the our line of thought. So we have had several waves of immigration. The first one was slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The second one was primarily people who came to America for study.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have the third wave, which is Africans coming to America to emigrate for economic reasons, more than anything else. Mm-hmm. So you have had people who have come for different reasons, but the common denominator is that we are all here.
Yes.
We are all here.
And you are listening to WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. And this is Straight Talk Radio. If you want to join the conversation, call us at 773-942-7167. Also, this is a public supported station We are asking you, if you're enjoying what you're hearing and you like this radio station, we want you to help us keep it on the air. So if you could go to our webpage at www.wghcfm.org and make a tax-deductible donation, we will be glad. And we do encourage you to continue to support us. You could use your TuneIn app on Android, or you could download the WGHC 98.3 FM app in the App Store to continue to listen. Thank you.
Yes. So please support us if you can. Going back to the discussion, so you look at where we are today. Because we are right now talking about America.
Yes.
As in the United States of America. But you do realize that all over the Caribbean,
all Americas.
yes, and
Brazil.
yes, and one of the places that is most intriguing to me is Haiti.
Yes.
Haiti.
Yes.
Because I don't know that you can talk about the Igbo story to the Americans without spending time in Haiti.
And Jamaica sometimes.
Jamaica, too. Well, a lot of the Americas, Grenada,
Yes.
Barbados.
Barbados, yes.
Cuba.
West
Cuba.
Indies.
Cuba.
Yes. So, but, you know, how is it that all of this has happened, and today, except in little ways, I think there has been, well, slavery lasted a long time.
Yes, it did.
And it helped, it tried very hard to depersonalize the slaves.
Yes.
Make them stateless,
Yep.
homeless, and without history.
Yes.
A lot of the current descendants of these slaves, even when you do a DNA test,
Yes.
and it says it maps you to
Somewhere in Congo.
it maps
or
you
Nigeria.
to somewhere, yes. How do you connect? Because it has been such a long time. How do you connect? Do you think, okay, let me ask this as a question. Do you feel it is worthwhile to, okay, when somebody calls himself, my DNA says I'm Igbo, Awumonyi Igbo,
Yes.
what does that mean? Let me put it that way.
So, Chimamanda, shout out. She talked about the dangers of a single story. And having a single story that you are an Igbo person is still a single story.
Okay.
Having a single story that you came from descendants of slave is still a single story. Until you could be able to fill in the gaps. If I go to Obama, when I was reading his book, he had to connect with who he is. He had that confusion of, is he
Kenyan?
from the white side? Is he Kenyan? Is he African American? Until he was able to actually resolve that conflict and figure out who he was and what his story is, then his life started happening, because he had to solve the foundation problem first.
Okay.
And I think the single story that the DNA from whomever, or 23andMe, or, by the way, 23andMe, support the show, whoever, I mean, whatever DNA place that you're using to get you to say where you are, it's a single story. We need to get the entire story. Part of what we're doing here is important, but it's good for people that are listening to actually do some of this work. I know that African American history may not be as elaborately taught in schools as the other histories when they teach American history, but it's good that people actually do, the people who could at this age.
Yes. And if I may allude to what I believe should be our responsibility.
Yes.
Those of us who have the privilege of knowing the African side of the story,
Yes.
is to make sure that, one, this Black History Month connect with another African that have been in the diaspora for the last 40 years, 400 years, the African American, make an effort to connect with an African American family or individual and cultivate their friendship, cultivate a relationship. That's one. Two, so that he or she can feel you on the American side of the story, of their story, and then you can feel them in the African side of the story. Two, I found out that one of the most, I'll say the most significant DNA testing group that actually have done a lot of work in with the African diaspora is African Ancestry. With Dr. Kittles, based on his genetic work. The other extension to that is now you can put your DNA in a database, and when you get tested as a recent African immigrant, you can actually have some hits of
people
DNA
who already
cousins
existing here, right?
Yeah.
So because like what you said, your grandfather or your great grandfather that was taken in slavery may have ended up in the Americas.
Yes.
And if you put in your DNA,
I could find
boom,
my
you could
cousins.
find some of your distant cousins, and that is something that we should be able to do, in the sense that if somebody, and I'm going to do it, because for this single reason, if somebody ever contacts me that is my DNA cousin, I will welcome them and I will fill them in on what side, on our side, Igbo side of the story. Again, to root them.
Yes.
And to give them a sense of belonging. I mean, I met a young lady yesterday. Her name is Kilanna. Kelanna. It was given to her by her father, who an African American young lady. And I told her, I said, my middle name is Kenenna. So you see that despite 400 years, there's something about this linguistic DNA that is still there, that they could still form words.
Yes.
That look like,
yes,
and feel like,
yes,
and seem like, sound like our names.
Yes.
And so when I told her, I said, Kenenna means thank God. Nna meaning father. But yes, I mean, she was so outstanding. So we can, instead of calling them Akata, let's remove that. Or people frowning at the connection. Really, they have paved a lot of way for us. Like Joseph.
Right. So when I came, right, I was irritated by some of the things that were not the way that I experienced them, and by people who I thought looked like me and did things differently than I did.
Sure.
It took me a while to actually cool down, and there was this guy, Ray, that I went to school with, Baltimore City Community College. Ray, if you're listening, shout out. And if it wasn't for Ray, I mean, I cultivated a friendship with him, and he took me through the things I had no idea. I mean, history I wouldn't have known anyway, but he made me want to learn actually about the people that got here before me, about the Africans that got here before me. He was the first person that told me what Kwanzaa was. I mean, I had no idea what Kwanzaa was, and the first time I heard of it, I'm thinking, why create something else? But going through not just learning what Kwanzaa is on paper and talking about it, he took me to a Kwanzaa celebration, and I now get it, right? So
yes,
there are things that we do back home and it looks different here until you understand, you get under the covers. That's what you're suggesting, and I co-sign. You
yes,
have to get in relationships and understand each other on both sides.
So maybe we'll have the opportunity, as we talk about the cultural influences, the coronary influences,
Yep.
Influence in folk music and in learning. Yeah. So yes, everything.
Yes.
The New Yam Festival. I mean, on both sides of the
And
Atlantic.
the New Yam versus the Junkenu.
The Junkenu in Jamaica and most of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that, again, one of the most significant thing that I learned looking at the history,
Yes.
is to realize that these Africans came as adults, formed, many of them already formed,
Yes.
and they had specific skill sets that they brought to the Americas. So they didn't come to America to learn how to farm.
Yes.
They didn't come to America to learn how to
build a house.
They didn't come to America to learn how to build communities. They didn't come to America to know how to build a home or to build a family. They didn't come to America to know how to forge steel. We were firing steel at a higher temperature than the Europeans when they came to us. So a lot of the welding work, a lot of the carpentry, the artisans, and because in the plantation economy, the slaves are the ones that go first to clear the bush, till the ground, build their own quarters, sustain life there, create a means of production that is profitable before they have enough money to build the master's house, and then the master comes at the back at the end of a successful establishment. The farm is already set up. Everything is set up, and then starts enjoying the fruit. So you cannot say that those kinds of people are lazy. You can't say those people are no good. They're all just looking for a handout, or like what the present immigration conversation is all about.
Yes,
that they are not productive, or that you don't want their family to come with them. Of all the people who have arrived,
what other merit do you need them?
That's right. So of all the people that are arrived in the Americas, the African American is the only one who has not brought a good chunk of his family or her family.
We talked about that when we were talking about immigration.
That's right.
But, in listening to all of this, one thing that struck me when you talked about African immigrants also being involved in the DNA project.
Yes.
It just struck me, one of the biggest no-nos among Ndi Igbo is incest.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So we are now in America. We have children. Our children go to school. They are dating boys and girls, a lot of whom are African American.
Yep.
How do you know
that it's not your cousin, or second cousin, or third cousin?
That's right.
Yep.
That is a very strong reason why
check out your DNA.
We should check out our DNA.
Yeah. Do your DNA test right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that Okwansala.
Yes. That's right.
Onsala. The Igbo do not. It is a terrible thing.
Yes.
So I just thought about it.
Yes. So talking about a single story, by the way, you're listening to us on WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station, and this is Straight Talk. We are discussing Ndi Igbo in America. So the first wave of Igbos to arrive is what we're going to get to eventually. But to start that conversation, because we're getting close to time, we talked about the stories and who came first, and I will drop one name that everybody knows, Olaoda Ekwana of Iseka, Anambra State. Isaka, I don't know how Iseke, but the way it's written is...
Well, a lot of things get bastardized with time.
Right. Yes. What was amazing to me was he came as a boy. And I mean, if you read it, he's probably about 9, 10, maybe not even old enough, with his sister.
Yes.
But he had he had gone through enough, probably going through the age grades and the
Igbo socialization process
to be able to the thing he recalled in his biography about where he came from, who they were, what the cultures were, understanding what the difference between the servitude and slavery was. And it's amazing to me to read that and say, look at a boy of 10 being able to recall all this.
Well, you're so correct, because again, people will go back and say he was an illiterate. What do you mean by that?
Because he couldn't read or write.
Because English. No, he doesn't need to know English. Or he was well educated.
Yes.
He was well socialized.
Yes.
At 12, he had reached the point of assimilating every aspect of his culture,
yes,
and could tell the story later on. Of course, maybe in our next show we'll talk about it.
Yes.
There has been a huge controversy around him, because there are some American scholars,
yes,
who do not want to place him as a slave boy. They want to praise him as a native-born African who told the story of slavery, because the significance of Oledo's biography,
yes,
was that it was the first biography by a slave and the first American biography.
That was happening then, that he made sure that, so he did some things to make sure that they know this is me, this is my experience. There are some experiences you cannot witness if you didn't live.
Yes. I don't know, but you see, they have various reasons why they say he didn't do that. But the important thing that his book answered, and that's why it's important that we tell our own story, is that he was able to debunk the slave narrative, the European narrative and the American narrative, that slavery was an improvement on the life of the African, by showing that he was living well in a civilized,
structured society,
and was actually dislocated and brought into servitude and a very difficult life. And so he painted the life that was going on where he grew up, and also was the first to describe the Middle Passage. And that actually was what gave impetus to the efforts of William Wilberforce to ban slave trade. So people talk about William Wilberforce, but they don't want to mention Olede Kwano and his abolition movement that he led.
There's a movie out there, Amazing Grace, that mentions him.
Yes.
Played by, I forgot the guy from Senegalese played the But if you're not a reader, you could watch Amazing Grace and try to get the story. But when we talk about abolitionists, we talk about all the Europeans and all the Americans that did the work, but not the enslaved Africans, some of them who got free, that actually did a lot of the work themselves. It's almost like you guys didn't know what to do, and we didn't help you.
You had the Surgeon of Truth, you had the Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, and so many of them, but also Olede Kwano. Now, he's not mentioned so much in the Americas
because he did a lot of his later work in
England. Yes, but he grew up here.
Yes,
I think you hit the nail on the head. To acknowledge Olede Kwano is to acknowledge that you came to a people,
a thriving society,
took them away, and deliberately depersonalized them for financial gain. And remember, these are quote-unquote Christian countries. It would be terrible as a good Christian to accept that you could do this to a fellow human being. It was important that story not be told. And but again, it is left for every person to tell his story.
Yes.
So his narrative should be, I think it's one of the things that should be looked at during Black History Month.
Yes. Definitely. And so for our listeners, we will challenge you. Do know that, don't be ignorant of your story.
Yes.
Go to our Facebook page, Straight Talk. We will leave some maps. We will leave some information. You can buy a book by Douglas Chambers, The Igbos of Virginia.
Yes.
You can also look at a book by Michael Gomez, who, they changed their colors. So I think
Africans in diaspora.
The Africans in the diaspora, Michael Gomez.
Yes.
And of course, the book, what we are talking about, the narrative.
I would like to suggest one on the other side of the Atlantic. Okay. It's the Igbos of Eastern Nigeria, by Uchendu.
Uchendu, that's right.
Yes.
Those are good books to read, and so that you begin to understand what we're talking about. The reality of it that first of all, I'm not the first Igbo in the American diaspora.
No.
So I need to learn from those who came before me, and I need to watch, acknowledge their effort and their contributions, so that America will not define me. I have to tell my own story to America. We are all, as new immigrants, bringing value to this country.
Right.
And so, in this modern age, for anyone to allow anybody to make caricature of your identity or your contribution or your worth because you don't know your history, it's really it's unconscionable. I mean, you have yourself to blame. I mean, when I was going to primary school, I was taught that Mungo Park discovered River Niger. But again, if anybody should do that if I should assimilate those kind of knowledge now,
today,
I have myself to blame.
Yes.
And then hopefully we will also at some point see if any of these authors would join us in our conversation. That would really be interesting.
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
That would be wonderful. And I mean, I will like to, as we move forward, claim some of these famous people that these famous things. Nat Turner, for example, coming out of Virginia with that kind of boisterousness that we get blamed for, that Igbos always. I was having a conversation with my cousin, and we're talking about those things that, I mean, he watched the show and he was talking about, you know, agreeing that sometimes the things that we do that are just it's just our nature, and it's our confidence, and people mistake it for. That's what I see in some of these people. Nat Turner, there is Edward Wilmot Blyden, there's Prince Hall. There are a few of them that I will look at and say, yep, that behavior, that's an Igbo man.
No, you know, Archibald Montat from Jamaica,
yes,
self-identified as Igbo.
Maybe Marcus Garvey
became
despite the faults, right?
No. Again, if you go to Jamaica,
yes,
majority of the Igbos were sent to the northwestern part of Jamaica, around Montego Bay.
Yes.
That's right, and that's where St. Anne Parish.
St. Anne Parish. Yes.
That's where majority of the Igbos went to. And in our next program, I'd like us to talk about what was the perception of the Igbo, because the Americans have, both in the Caribbean and the North America,
continental
America,
your reputations go before and after.
That's right. No. They had their own perception, and some of them are not really glorious.
Right.
But again, that's in the backdrop of a time where the slave owners owned the story.
Yes.
But now we know who we are, and we could examine those traits.
Until the lion could tell their story, the hunter will always claim the glory, right?
That's right.
Anyway. So we're coming to the end of our show. Thank you for listening. Once again, we would like to remind you that you're listening on WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. This is a not-for-profit organization. So please donate as much as you can on our webpage, www.wghcfm.org. Your donations are tax deductible, and we thank you in advance for your donation and for supporting us. Join us once again on Saturday at 4 p.m. U.S. Central Time as we continue the discussion. This is Ndi Igbo in America. That's that's our discussion. We'll talk about the first waves of Ndi Igbo to get here, and then we'll continue with the rest of the waves that came after. But thank you for joining us. Mazi Odeluga, any thoughts as we close?
Let's learn to tell our story.
And Mazi Obasi.
Anile Womunne. Let's find each other.
And have a good night. Catch your phone.
Ndewono.
Odeluga, any thoughts as we close?
Let's learn to tell our story.